My name is Alara Vance, and for the longest time, my world was woven with the intricate threads of code, logic, and the quiet satisfaction of building something that truly worked. I live in Port Blossom, a city where the scent of cedar and saltwater often mingles with the faint hum of innovation. For 5 years, I'd poured my heart and mind into my role at Silverstream Corporation, specifically into a project I'd christened the Meridian Platform. It wasn't just software. To me, it was like a carefully tended garden, a complex ecosystem of data and processes that I'd nurtured from a seedling idea into a robust system that helped our company navigate the complexities of global operations. Meridian had recently been instrumental in securing a landmark partnership, a moment that felt like the culmination of countless quiet nights and patient problem-solving. I'm not one for grand pronouncements, but a gentle sense of pride had settled in my heart, and with it, a hope that my dedication would be seen, truly seen. They say timing is everything. I should have perhaps sensed the subtle shift in the currents the moment Mr. Alastair Finch smiled, a fleeting, almost detached expression, during our first proper meeting. It was a Monday morning, the kind where the early sunlight streams through the tall windows of the Silverstream building, painting long, hopeful stripes on the polished floors. But the air in his office, on the newly renovated executive floor, felt different, cooler, more rarefied. I had spent the weekend mentally rehearsing, not a confrontation, but a conversation. I wanted to talk about my role, about how Meridian had grown beyond its initial scope, and how my responsibilities had grown with it. A formal recognition, an adjustment in my compensation, felt like a natural next step, a quiet acknowledgement of the value created. Mr. Finch had been CEO for only a few weeks. He'd arrived with a reputation for sharp turnarounds and a style that was more boardroom gloss than workshop grit. His predecessor had known my work, had often stopped by my little corner alcove to see Meridian's progress. Mr. Finch's office was still a testament to his newness, minimalist, almost stark, with a vast mahogany desk clear of personal effects, save for a sleek, unopened laptop and a single, perfectly sculpted glass paperweight. "Alara, thank you for making the time," he said, his voice smooth, modulated. He gestured to one of the leather chairs that faced his desk, chairs that felt a little too large, a little too imposing for the conversation I'd hoped to have. I began gently, explaining my journey with Meridian, the late nights spent coaxing it to life, the innovative pathways I'd carved through complex data landscapes, the recent success of the partnership it had facilitated. I spoke of my desire to have my compensation reflect the expanded stewardship I'd naturally assumed. He listened with an air of patient attentiveness, nodding slowly, his gaze steady. "I've reviewed your contributions, Alara," he began, his tone even, almost soothing. "The Meridian platform is indeed a significant asset. However, the company is currently navigating a period of comprehensive organizational reassessment. Until the new structures are fully crystallized, we've instituted a temporary hold on all compensation dialogues. It's a matter of procedural alignment, not a reflection on individual merit. The timing, regrettably, is inopportune for such a review at this precise moment." Timing. There it was, that word, delivered with such calm finality. I felt a small, almost imperceptible tightening in my chest, but I kept my expression composed. "So, no adjustments will be considered this quarter?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Not at this juncture," he replied, a hint of something I couldn't quite name. Dismissal? Softening the edges of his polite words. "Let us revisit this once the realignment has been completed." He rose then, a subtle signal that our brief audience was concluded, before I could articulate the questions that were beginning to form like mist in my mind. As I walked back through the hushed corridors, the usual morning bustle of Silverstream seemed slightly muted to my ears. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email notification. Team brief. Meridian forward vision. Updated schematic. Curiosity, mingled with a faint unease, led me to the large digital display board outside the main strategy suite. A new architectural diagram for Meridian glowed on the screen, intricate, color-coded, and undeniably familiar. It was the heart of my design, the very pathways I had meticulously charted. Every flow, every interconnected module, except my name was nowhere near it. Instead, in bold lettering beneath the title Lead Visionary, Meridian Initiative, was the name Julian Thorne. Julian, who had joined Silverstream barely 6 months ago, known more for his confident presentations and network of contacts than for any deep, hands-on system architecture. That was the first moment a colder, clearer understanding began to dawn, like a pale winter sunrise. This wasn't just about timing. This was the subtle, almost silent, beginning of something else entirely. The calendar invitation appeared in my inbox at an hour when the city of Port Blossom was still draped in the soft, pre-dawn light, just past 6. The subject line was starkly simple: organizational update. 10:30 that morning, Mr. Finch's office. 15 minutes allocated, wedged between his financial reviews. No agenda, no preamble. I stared at the notification, a familiar, quiet flutter in my stomach, the kind that whispers a warning before the mind fully grasps the reason. I arrived at Mr. Finch's door at precisely 10:28. He didn't look up from his laptop when I tapped gently. "Enter," he said, his voice slightly muffled by his concentration on the screen. The vast office felt even more impersonal than before. No offer of water this time, no preliminary courtesies, just the heavy silence of unspoken intentions, a silence so profound I found myself consciously steadying my breath. Finally, he closed his laptop with a soft click and folded his hands on the polished mahogany. His gaze met mine, direct but devoid of warmth. "Alara, I'll be direct. As part of our ongoing organizational restructuring, we are making some strategic shifts in leadership within the core systems division." My stomach seemed to clench, a cold not forming, but I held my composure, my face, I hoped, a mask of calm attentiveness. "Effective immediately, your role will transition to that of Senior Technical Advisor. You will, of course, retain your current salary and benefits. However, moving forward, you will provide support to Julian Thorne, who is assuming the role of head of the Meridian Initiative." "Julian?" I blinked, a slow, deliberate movement, processing the words. Julian, who just last month had quietly asked me to explain the nuances of the data harmonization algorithm I'd spent a year perfecting. Julian, who had once, during a critical test phase, inadvertently overloaded a staging server because he'd overlooked a fundamental capacity parameter. I opened my mouth, a question forming, then closed it, a wave of weariness washing over me. What was there to ask that wouldn't sound like pleading, like a refusal to accept what was clearly already decided? Mr. Finch continued, his voice maintaining its smooth, even cadence, as if he were outlining a minor logistical adjustment. "This is not a reflection on your past contributions, Alara. It is a strategic decision. Julian brings a different leadership profile, a fresh perspective geared towards rapid expansion and market visibility. We value your deep experience, naturally, but we also require complete alignment with our forward-vectored strategic imperatives." I nodded slowly, a tightness in my throat making speech difficult. "And my responsibilities in this advisory capacity?" I managed, my voice quieter than I would have liked. "Consider it a mentorship position. In essence," he replied, a faint, almost benign smile touching his lips. "You will guide the new team, provide essential legacy knowledge, ensure continuity. Your insights will be invaluable, but from a non-decision-making standpoint." Non-decision-making. The phrase echoed in the quiet room. It felt like being gently, expertly, and irrevocably distanced from the very heart of my creation, handed a visitor's pass to the world I had built. The meeting concluded 3 minutes later. There was no space created for dissent, no room for the questions that now crowded my mind. Just polite, corporate phrases like, "Thank you for your understanding," and "We are confident in your continued support during this important transition." As I walked back to my familiar alcove, The office around me hummed with its usual productive energy, a stark contrast to the sudden stillness within me. I sank into my chair, the worn fabric a familiar comfort. I opened my inbox, and there it was, a company-wide email announcement. Exciting leadership news. Julian Thorne appointed head of Meridian Initiative. His photograph was attached, smiling assured, in a crisp new suit that looked like it had been chosen for just such an occasion. My name, Elara Vance, architect and nurturer of the Meridian platform for 5 painstaking years, was not mentioned. Not once. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. 5 years, hundreds of quiet, dedicated nights, every elegant line of code, every solution meticulously crafted, now to be filtered through someone else's title, someone else's narrative. A profound shock held me captive, but beneath it, deeper than the initial sting of hurt, a different sensation began to stir. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a dawning awareness, sharp and clear. This wasn't a realignment. This was a quiet, methodical erasure. The company-wide address began promptly at 9:15 the next morning. I found a seat in the middle rows of the auditorium, a little to the side, visible enough to be noted as present, yet distant enough to feel somewhat sheltered. Mr. Finch stood at the podium, his presence commanding, his voice resonating with the polished charisma he'd demonstrated since his arrival. Behind him, a large screen displayed a dynamic loop of upward-trending graphs, partner logos, and the bold, optimistic title, Silverstream Forward, Innovating for Tomorrow. Before we delve into our strategic outlook, Mr. Finch began, his voice imbued with enthusiasm. I want to take a moment to acknowledge a pivotal development, one that underscores our commitment to cutting-edge solutions. I'm referring, of course, to the Meridian platform, an infrastructure that has become the bedrock of our recent landmark partnership and is set to revolutionize our operational efficiencies. For a fleeting, foolish second, my breath caught. A tiny, stubborn ember of hope flickered within me. Perhaps, just perhaps, there would be a moment of genuine acknowledgement. And the driving force behind its recent evolution and future trajectory is our new head of the Meridian Initiative. Please join me in congratulating Julian Thorne. A wave of applause swept through the auditorium. Julian, seated near the front, rose with a confident grin, subtly adjusting the lapels of his blazer as he made his way to the stage, moving with an air of someone stepping into a role they believed was always destined to be theirs. I sat very still, my hands resting in my lap. It felt as if a bubble of silence had enveloped me. No one glanced my way, no curious or sympathetic eyes met mine. Mr. Finch continued, his arm extended towards Julian in a gesture of magnanimous endorsement. Julian has spearheaded the refinement of our core metrics logic, simplified our performance tracking architecture, and championed a culture of proactive, data-driven strategy that is already setting new benchmarks. I stared at the slide now projected behind them. My slides. My architectural framework. I knew every intricate detail of those charts, every carefully chosen color, every weighted algorithm. I had built them in the quiet solitude of my office, through countless iterations, through the crucible of rigorous testing and client feedback sessions, through long, meticulous discussions with our compliance teams. And now they were being presented as Julian's vision, his legacy. The applause subsided. Mr. Finch gestured for Julian to begin his presentation. As Julian clicked to his first technical slide, a detail, small and almost insignificant, caught my eye. In the very bottom corner of the screen, in tiny, pale gray letters, was the original file name, Elara_Meridian_core_v7.ppt. They hadn't even bothered to rename the file. A strange sense of detachment washed over me. I sat there, a polite, almost neutral expression on my face, nodding slightly at appropriate moments, as if I were an interested observer at a presentation about some unfamiliar, albeit impressive, system. Around me, I could hear snippets of conversation, hushed admiration for Julian's brilliance, and the remarkable speed with which he had taken charge. My employee badge, resting against my chest, suddenly felt unusually heavy, a label for a person whose contributions were fading into an unacknowledged past. Later that afternoon, around 2 o'clock, another internal email landed in my inbox. The subject line was bright and congratulatory, celebrating Julian Thorne and the future of Meridian. I opened it. The header was a custom-designed banner, vibrant and modern, featuring a stylized representation of one of my original dashboard layouts. It was cropped, a new color palette applied, but the underlying structure, the unique visual language I had developed, was unmistakably mine. No one seemed to notice. Or perhaps no one thought it significant. I rose from my desk, walked to an empty meeting room down the hall, and switched off the lights, sinking into one of the chairs in the dimness. There were no tears, no surge of outrage. Just a profound, echoing silence that pulsed in my ears, a silence so loud it seemed to absorb all other sound. The erasure wasn't just happening in private meetings anymore. It was now brightly illuminated, publicly celebrated, framed by applause and congratulatory emails. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't compose an indignant email to Mr. Finch demanding an explanation. I didn't confront Julian. I did something that people like them, accustomed to more overt reactions, perhaps never anticipated. I remained quiet. But beneath that surface stillness, my mind, accustomed to navigating complex systems, began to work with a new, focused clarity, honing itself like a well-tempered blade. By 7 o'clock the next morning, the earliest hint of dawn was painting the port blossom sky in hues of lavender and rose. I was at my desk, a steaming cup of herbal tea warming my hands, a new, quiet determination settling within me. The Meridian platform. My Meridian. I opened its back-end architecture, the familiar lines of code greeting me like old friends. I delved into its core layers, tracing the intricate pathways of data from server to interface, a journey I knew by heart. Julian, I noted, had already begun to implement superficial changes, minor tweaks to naming conventions, cosmetic adjustments to the user interface layouts. But the foundational structure, the intricate engine I had so carefully designed and built, remained untouched. They hadn't dared to alter its bones, likely because they didn't possess the intimate knowledge required to do so without causing immediate and catastrophic collapse. What they also didn't know, what wasn't detailed in any of the formal documentation I'd painstakingly prepared for handover, were the nearly invisible microstructures I had woven throughout the system. Tiny, elegant patches of self-regulating logic designed to stabilize network load, to recalibrate for data lag, to automatically archive redundant entries, ensuring the platform's smooth, efficient operation. I had embedded them in the earliest days of development, long before a formal compliance team was even in place, as safeguards, as silent guardians of the system's integrity. They were invisible to anyone who hadn't lived and breathed inside Meridian's architecture as I had. As I worked, my headphones were in, playing soft, instrumental music that helped me focus, my expression carefully neutral. Colleagues drifted past my alcove, some offering brief, preoccupied nods, others seemingly looking right through me. I offered a gentle smile in return when our eyes met, but behind the screen, line by line, I was reacquainting myself with every decision, every nuanced choice I had ever made in the creation of Meridian. And that's when I saw it, nestled deep within the core logic module, the very engine that powered everything, the predictive modeling, the KPI calculations, the risk assessment simulator. It was all still running on EtherCore. EtherCore was a highly specialized, proprietary framework I had discovered and licensed privately 3 years prior. At the time, the team's budget request for a similar commercial solution had been repeatedly denied due to cost concerns and bureaucratic inertia. Needing the stability and advanced capabilities it offered to truly elevate Meridian, and unable to wait for the slow turning of corporate wheels, I had made a decision. I had purchased the developer enterprise license using my own personal funds, a quiet investment in the quality of my work. No one had ever asked to update it. No one had ever thought to replace it. It just worked, seamlessly, silently. I navigated to the license management panel within the EtherCore interface. There it was, clear and unambiguous. Owner, Alara Vance. License type, Developer Enterprise Gold. Status, active. Auto-renews, March 2 years hence. A slow breath escaped my lips. This foundational framework, the very skeleton upon which Meridian's multi-million-dollar operations now rested, wasn't owned by Silverstream Corporation. It was tied to my name, my personal credit card, my digital signature. They had quietly reassigned my role, attempted to dim my contributions, but their entire prized initiative, the one Julian was now supposedly leading, was running on a critical component that belonged, unequivocally, to me. I didn't say a word. Not that day, not the next. There would be no dramatic confrontations, no ultimatums. Just quiet observation, a careful assessment of the shifting landscape, and a deep, internal preparation. Because if they believed my influence had been neutralized, they were only looking at the surface. And the surface, as I knew better than anyone, seldom told the complete story. The true, vital systems always pulsed with life far beneath it. By 8:15 the following Monday, I was already immersed in the system, headphones on, a barrier of soft music between me and the waking office. My breathing was even, my focus absolute. They believed I was quietly accepting my new, diminished role, perhaps preparing to fade into the background. Julian had comfortably settled into the larger office that had once been a senior project director's. Mr. Finch had moved on to his next strategic pronouncements. Human Resources had neatly distributed my former responsibilities into concise bullet points under Julian's new title. No one suspected a thing. That was precisely as I preferred it. The initial sting of injustice had faded, replaced by something cooler, more analytical, a surgical precision in my thoughts. I knew every intricate pathway of Meridian, every logical gate, every feedback loop. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, how to allow its true state, under its new stewardship, to become undeniably clear. My intention was not to cause ruin, but to ensure that the truth of the system's health, or lack thereof, under ill-informed guidance, would surface. Julian, in his eagerness to impress, was advocating for metrics that prioritized volume and velocity above all else. My original design for the Meridian's core performance indicators had always emphasized a balanced algorithm, client satisfaction, long-term retention, the accuracy of our conversion data. These were signals of genuine, sustainable health. But the new directive, filtering down from Julian, was all about impressive, immediate numbers. So, I began to make subtle adjustments, not to break the system, but to ensure its reporting would accurately reflect the consequences of this new, unbalanced approach. Where Julian was implementing superficial tweaks to dashboards to make numbers look good, I ensured that the underlying, more complex calculations, the ones that showed the true picture, were still being meticulously logged, even if they weren't immediately visible on his preferred reports. If he simplified a forecasting model to yield quicker, more optimistic projections, I ensured the system also tracked the deviation from the original, more robust 7-variable model I had designed. The platform, in essence, would begin to tell two stories, the one Julian wanted to see and the one that was actually true. The early alert system, which I had designed to be dynamic and highly sensitive, flagging anomalies before they could escalate, was another area of concern. Julian found its frequent, nuanced warnings too granular and distracting from the big picture. He had begun to instruct his team to override or downgrade certain alert categories. My adjustments were to ensure that even if the surface-level alerts were suppressed on his dashboards, the critical event data was still captured, time-stamped, and archived in the system's deep logs. The Meridian platform would remain calm on the surface, just as he wished, but the true record of its internal state would be preserved. It was a delicate, painstaking process, like tuning a complex instrument to reveal its authentic voice, even if that voice was one of growing disharmony. By 11:30 that morning, I was an observer in the quarterly metrics review, a meeting I once would have led. Julian stood at the head of the conference table, confidently walking the regional managers through the enhanced Meridian dashboard. The large screen behind him glowed, with an array of color-coded bars and charts, predominantly of vibrant, reassuring green, system uptime, client engagement metrics, sales cycle velocity. It all looked remarkably, almost flawlessly, positive. Too positive. Mr. Finch leaned back in his chair, arms comfortably folded behind his head, a satisfied smile playing on his lips, the smile of a man who believed he had orchestrated a masterstroke. This, colleagues, is precisely the kind of accelerated performance I envisioned, he declared, his voice tinged with self-congratulation. We've transformed what was becoming a cumbersome legacy system into a high-precision engine for growth. A polite murmur of agreement went around the table. No one noticed the faint, almost imperceptible smile that touched my lips as I sat quietly in the back row. It wasn't a smile of bitterness, nor one of vindictive pride. It was a smile of quiet patience, of restraint. Let them bask in the glow of these manufactured successes. Let the soothing green lights lull them into a deeper sense of complacency. I wasn't actively sabotaging Meridian. I was meticulously observing, carefully documenting every skewed metric they lauded, every subtle variance they dismissed, every hairline crack in the foundation they mistook for a superficial blemish. Because when the carefully constructed facade eventually began to show its inherent weaknesses, and it would, for truth, like water, always finds its level, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The data, my meticulously preserved, unvarnished data, would speak for itself. The wide, glass-walled conference room on the executive floor was already buzzing with a quiet energy by 9:30 the next morning. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the polished oak table around which the senior team and several key investors were gathered. Freshly brewed coffee perfumed the air, and the low hum of anticipatory murmurs filled the space. On the large screen at the front of the room, a sleek presentation deck was queued up, its title slide promising Q3 performance, exceeding expectations. I had found a seat near the end of the table, a little removed from the center of gravity, a silent observer. Julian stood at the front, his posture exuding a practiced confidence. He wore a new navy blue blazer, so new that the faint creases from its department store packaging were still visible on the sleeves. He cleared his throat, and a hush fell over the room. "Good morning, everyone. Let's begin with our forecast accuracy," he announced, clicking the remote. A slide titled Precision at Scale, Our Predictive Edge appeared. Emblazoned across it in large, confident font was a bright green banner, 98.6% forecast reliability. A collective murmur of approval rippled through the attendees. Mr. Finch leaned back slightly, a look of profound satisfaction on his face, arms folded as if observing a favored student's triumph. The investors exchanged pleased glances. I gazed at the slide, a muscle tightening almost imperceptibly in my jaw. That number was an illusion. Not a minor discrepancy, not a rounding error, but a carefully engineered fiction. The Meridian system, with its forecasting model now running on Julian's simplified, for variable configuration and weakened predictive coefficients, wasn't capable of achieving anywhere near 90% accuracy, let alone the figure displayed. The last simulation I had discreetly run, based on its current compromised state, had projected a potential accuracy drift of at least 12%, and that was before Julian had implemented his latest streamlining optimizations. He either didn't understand the inherent risks of the variables he'd discarded, or, more troublingly, he understood and chose to ignore them for the sake of a superficially impressive number. Our client delivery timelines, Julian continued, clicking to the next slide, have shown a remarkable improvement of 14% quarter over quarter. Furthermore, stockout incidents have plummeted to an all-time low. We are, by all key indicators, operating significantly ahead of the market curve by at least 3 months. The reality, which I knew from the deep logs Meridian was still faithfully recording, was starkly different. Delivery timelines appeared to be improving primarily because the nuanced, early-stage alerts for potential delays, the ones Julian had deemed excessive, had been systematically suppressed from the primary dashboards. They weren't seeing the accumulating missed shipment markers, the subtle logistical snags, the mismatched invoicing data, because no one was configured to listen to those quieter, deeper signals anymore. And the stockout calculation? The algorithm had been subtly altered to delay the recognition of a stockout event until 2 full reporting cycles later. It was akin to disabling all the smoke detectors in a building and then proudly celebrating the complete absence of fire alarms. I glanced around the room. Every face was alight with approval, nodding in agreement with Julian's glowing report. Mr. Finch leaned forward, his voice warm with praise. "Julian, this is outstanding. These are some of the most robust performance metrics this company has ever seen." A ripple of polite applause followed. Smiles were exchanged, along with appreciative eye contact and affirmations of success. And I sat there, my expression carefully neutral, my hands resting calmly in my lap. They were applauding a phantom, praising a version of Meridian that existed only on those polished slides, a system running on algorithms now subtly calibrated to mislead, all dressed up in the sophisticated language of progress and innovation. But I remained silent, because the longer this illusion of flawless performance was maintained, the more profound the eventual reckoning would be when the underlying realities could no longer be concealed. I wasn't going to hasten that moment. I was, with a quiet diligence, simply documenting its inevitable approach. That evening, as the city lights of Port Blossom began to twinkle into existence against the deepening twilight sky, I was at home, reviewing historical trend files on my personal encrypted drive. I was meticulously tracking the performance drift within Meridian over the past 5 weeks, cross-referencing Julian's optimistic reports with the raw, unadjusted data I had ensured the system continued to log. I highlighted the false gains, the unreported service gaps, the growing discrepancies between projected efficiencies and actual operational outcomes. As I saved the updated analysis, a soft chime alerted me to a new message. It was a LinkedIn connection request, accompanied by a brief note from a Mr. Samuel Holloway, Vice President of Operations at Clearbrook Partners, one of Silverstream's most valued and long-standing clients. My heart gave a small, unexpected leap. I opened the message. "Dear Ms. Vance," it read. A quick, perhaps informal question. "My team and I were wondering if you are still personally overseeing the Meridian platform's core functionalities. We've observed some rather perplexing shifts in the data outputs and consistency over the past month or so. The feel of the system's reliability isn't quite what we've become accustomed to from your excellent work. I hope this message finds you well. Sincerely, Samuel Holloway." I stared at the screen for a long, contemplative moment. They had noticed. Someone outside the carefully constructed internal narrative of Silverstream had sensed the change, the subtle degradation in quality. And in that quiet moment, sitting in the soft lamplight of my study, the residual vestiges of hurt didn't flare into anger. Instead, they coalesced, sharpening into a more focused, resolute awareness. I didn't reply to Mr. Holloway's message. Not yet. Because I knew, with a growing certainty, that soon the numbers, the true, unvarnished numbers, would speak with a clarity and volume that I, in my quiet way, never could. By 8:50 the next morning, I was standing near the large window on the operations floor, watching the early commuters navigate the streets of Port Blossom below, a river of purpose flowing towards the city's heart. My inbox remained conspicuously quiet, my internal chat notifications minimal. Julian, it seemed, had ceased including me on any communications related to Meridian's ongoing development or performance. Meetings I once led, where my insights were sought and valued, now took place without my presence. Status reports I once meticulously reviewed and refined now bypassed my desk entirely, landing directly in Mr. Finch's inbox. And yet, every metric they praised, every success they attributed to Julian's visionary leadership, was still fundamentally built upon the intricate architecture I had so carefully, so painstakingly engineered. I approached Clara, a senior analyst I'd worked alongside for several years, someone with whom I'd shared countless early morning coffees and late-night troubleshooting sessions. Someone I had hoped still saw me, the true architect, beneath the recent layers of corporate reshuffling. Clara, have you by any chance noticed the recent trends in the forecast models? I asked gently, keeping my voice low and unalarming. They seem to be skewing rather heavily towards optimistic projections. I've logged at least 4 significant misalignments this past month between projected and actual client delivery timelines based on the raw data feeds. She glanced up from her screen, her expression one of mild surprise, perhaps a touch of discomfort. Oh, Alara. I mean, possibly? Things are moving so fast with Julian's new strategies. But, well, it's not really your direct area of oversight anymore, is it? The words, though softly spoken, landed with a weight far heavier than intended. A polite, almost invisible boundary had been drawn. I'm not trying to interfere, of course, I said, my voice even quieter now. I just believe that someone should perhaps take a closer look at the underlying data integrity before the next quarterly report is finalized. Alara, she interrupted, her tone kind but firm, a hint of weariness in her eyes. I know you care deeply about Meridian. We all know you poured your heart into building it. But things are evolving. Julian has Mr. Finch's full confidence. It might be healthier for you to perhaps let go a little. Focus on your new advisory role. I stood there for a moment that stretched a little too long, the hum of the office suddenly seeming louder. Then I nodded, summoning a polite, fleeting smile. Yes, you're right, of course. Thank you, Clara. By 10:20, I was back at my desk, the sense of isolation more palpable than ever. The busy hum of Silverstream Corporation had never felt so simultaneously full of activity and yet so profoundly empty to me. Conversations flowed around me, but rarely to me. Colleagues hurried past my alcove, their eyes focused, their minds already on their next task, their next meeting. It was as if I had become part of the office landscape, a familiar fixture they no longer consciously registered, like a potted plant in a quiet corner. And then the email arrived. The subject line was stark, flagged with high importance. Urgent. Order fulfillment discrepancy. Clearbrook Partners. My breath caught. I opened it. A major consignment of customized components, due for delivery to Clearbrook Partners that very morning, had failed to arrive at their primary manufacturing facility. According to Meridian's top-level dashboard, which Julian had proudly showcased just days before, all shipment milestones had been met, all logistics cleared. But Clearbrook's receiving department's automated confirmation, CC'd on the email, told a different story. Incomplete component batches, several units with outdated firmware, and critical customs documentation missing. The internal fulfillment team hadn't even flagged a potential issue because according to their simplified interface, no warning flags had been triggered. The nuanced, predictive alerts I had built into Meridian, designed specifically to preempt such multifaceted failures, had been silenced. I read the escalating chain of emails twice. Clearbrook Partners. One of Silverstream's foundational clients, a high-value, high-volume account, known for their loyalty and long-term partnership. Until, perhaps now. By 2:45 that afternoon, hushed whispers had begun to circulate through the operations floor. The whispers solidified into a grim rumor. Clearbrook Partners was formally indicating their intention to pull out of their upcoming annual contract renewal. A contract worth close to $8 million in projected revenue. Julian, in an emergency internal briefing, attributed the failure to an unforeseen and isolated logistics hiccup. Mr. Finch, in a hastily drafted internal memo, characterized Clearbrook's reaction as a regrettable but ultimately manageable client overreaction to a temporary operational challenge. But I knew better. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the first significant, visible fracture in the facade, the beginning of an inevitable unraveling. And no one in a position of authority seemed willing to acknowledge the deeper, systemic vulnerabilities that I had watched them cultivate. Later that afternoon, a new name appeared on the shared departmental calendar: Mr. David Sterling, Senior Systems Consultant, scheduled for an introductory back-end audit with Julian. A discreet note in the IT support group chat confirmed his status: an external contractor, highly credentialed, brought in by Mr. Finch to independently audit and optimize back-end system performance and reliability. Translation: Mr. Finch had finally sensed the tremors beneath his feet, the cracks appearing in his star performer's narrative, but was too entrenched in his own judgment, too proud, perhaps, to consult the person who had meticulously laid the very foundation of the system in question. I watched from a distance as Mr. Sterling was escorted to Julian's office, a distinguished man in his late 50s with a neatly trimmed gray beard, carrying an expensive-looking carbon fiber laptop case, exuding an air of quiet, professional confidence. By 4:50, Mr. Sterling was hunched over a large monitor in Julian's office, navigating through Meridian's core code libraries. Julian hovered nearby, looking slightly less self-assured than usual. I was at my desk, ostensibly reviewing old project documentation, but my attention was subtly attuned to the fragments of their conversation drifting across the open plan space. "I'm attempting to trace the full logic call for the primary predictive module," Mr. Sterling said, his voice thoughtful, tinged with a slight puzzlement. "But the framework seems to have several deeply embedded, almost unattributed reference points. I can't quite map their origin through the standard documentation. It's like there's a layer of legacy architecture here that's not fully transparent." Julian's voice, when he replied, was tight, defensive. "She made it unnecessarily complicated. Over-engineered it, probably on purpose." Mr. Sterling raised a skeptical eyebrow. Or perhaps, he mused, his gaze still fixed on the screen, just remarkably advanced for its time. Julian offered no response. Neither did I. Because I had already, quietly and irrevocably, stepped outside of that particular circle of inquiry. I was no longer part of their urgent search for solutions, nor was I a convenient repository for their impending blame. I was, for the first time in a long while, simply an observer, alone on the periphery, watching as the foundations they had so carelessly undermined began to perceptibly shift beneath their feet. And for the very first time, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I didn't feel the urge to intervene, to rush in and fix it. The truth, I sensed, was beginning to find its own path to the light. By 7:15 the next morning, I was alone in the Silverstream office, just as I had anticipated. The vast space was silent, save for the gentle hum of the servers from the cooled room down the hall. No overhead lights blazed yet, no cheerful morning chatter echoed between cubicles. Only the soft, steady glow of my monitor illuminated my face, and the quiet, rhythmic tapping of my keys was the sole sound in the pre-dawn stillness. I wore the silence like a familiar cloak now, a comforting embrace. Solid, known, unshakable. The quarterly board review meeting was scheduled for 8:30. They would be meticulously reviewing the system's performance report for Meridian, the same polished, artfully misleading set of metrics that Julian and his team had spent the past week embellishing. I had already seen an advanced draft of the presentation deck. It was a symphony of vibrant green graphs, strategically highlighted key performance indicators, and milestone achievements that were largely predicated on a system whose true operational health no longer reflected the glossy surface they were presenting. But this time, I knew, the underlying data would whisper a truth too persistent to ignore. I opened the discrete, custom diagnostic script I had written weeks ago, a small piece of code I had carefully embedded beneath a layer of seemingly redundant system logs. It was designed to be triggered only when a specific configuration of the Meridian dashboard, the one always used for executive boardroom presentations, was loaded. No one else knew it was there. Not the IT department, with their focus on overt threats. Not Julian, with his preference for superficial understanding. And certainly not Mr. Finch, who saw systems as tools, not as living, breathing entities. The script wasn't designed to be dramatic or destructive. It would simply inject 6 lines of unassuming text into the auto-generated executive summary report that accompanied the visual presentation. Quiet. Surgical. Precise. I took a slow, steadying breath and clicked execute. At 8:36, I knew it had gone live. From my remote access point, I could see the boardroom presentation initiating. Julian, I imagined, would be clicking through his introductory slides, his smile practiced and self-assured, wearing that same navy blazer he favored for significant meetings. Mr. Finch would be nodding along, leaning in with that air of performative engagement he had perfected. Then, they would arrive at the third slide, the critical one detailing Meridian's forecast accuracy and operational efficiency. And there, the room would pause. On the screen, embedded subtly at the very bottom of the complex forecast model chart, a new line of text would have appeared, rendered in a soft, unassuming gray font, almost easy to miss if one weren't looking closely. Data visualization reflects optimized outputs. Core algorithmic integrity requires review. Query: who authorized modifications to foundational variables? Silence. In my mind's eye, I could picture the scene, someone coughing uncomfortably. Julian staring at the screen, blinking rapidly, his composure faltering. Mr. Finch leaning forward, his brow furrowed, squinting at the unexpected addendum. Fingers, previously confident, would now hover uncertainly over laptop keyboards. One of the external board members, perhaps Ms. Albright, known for her sharp eye for detail, would look up, her expression quizzical. "Is this annotation part of the standard report, Julian?" she might ask, her voice cutting through the sudden stillness. Julian's voice, I imagined, would crack almost imperceptibly. That appears to be a minor formatting artifact. A glitch. We'll just move past that to the next dataset. Hold on a moment. Another voice would interject, firmer this time. Perhaps Mr. Arthur Pendleton, a senior director with a reputation for meticulousness, a man I knew only by his formidable reputation. Who inserted that query? And what does it mean, foundational variables? Julian would stammer, perhaps trying to flip backward and forward through the slides, desperately seeking a version of the presentation without the embedded lines. But the script had hard-coded the message into the live data feed that generated the report. No version of the deck would escape it now. Then would come the moment I had quietly anticipated. Mr. Pendleton, or another equally astute board member, would open their email. The automated system diagnostics, which my script had also subtly influenced, would have already dispatched a raw output log to each board member's inbox just moments before the meeting began. And there, appended to the bottom of that dense, technical email, the same 6 lines of text would have replicated. Mr. Pendleton would hit reply all. His email, I imagined, would be brief and pointed. Can someone please clarify the origin of the system's integrity query? And more to the point, who is Alara Vance, the original architect of EtherCore as noted in the deep system logs, and why is she not present in this room to speak to these foundational issues? The air in that boardroom would shift, become charged. At precisely 8:42, my own email pinged softly. It was from Silverstream's Chief Compliance Officer. Subject: urgent. Request for consultation. Meridian Platform Architecture Integrity. I didn't reply. Not immediately. I leaned back in my chair, my heart beating steadily, but every nerve within me felt taut, like a finely tuned piano wire. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a thrill of victory. It was a profound, focused calm. The Meridian system hadn't crashed. It hadn't exploded in a dramatic display of failure. It had simply whispered, just audibly enough, in the right ears, at the right time, to unsettle the carefully constructed narrative of those who had sought to control it. For weeks, I had been the subject of a quiet erasure. But this morning, without uttering a single word aloud, my truth was suddenly, unexpectedly, present in every important room. By 10:30 that morning, the summons arrived. I was called to the 11th floor executive boardroom, a space I hadn't entered in many months, not since my role had been so quietly, yet decisively, altered. The tone of the email from Mr. Finch's executive assistant was formal, tinged with an unmistakable urgency, and I sensed a new layer of caution. The board of directors requests your immediate presence to provide insights on certain system discrepancies that have come to light, particularly concerning the predictive model integrity of the Meridian platform. I walked into the room calmly, with the quiet composure of someone entering a space they know intimately, every nuance, every subtle shift in atmosphere. Julian was already seated at the long, polished table, his face pale, his posture rigid. Mr. Finch was pacing near the large projector screen, which was currently blank, his expression a tight mask, attempting a semblance of his usual confident half-smile. Around the table sat the assembled members of the board, Silverstream's chief compliance officer, the head of legal, and, to my quiet surprise, Mr. Samuel Holloway, the vice president from Clearbrook Partners. I took the only empty seat, a little way down from the head of the table. No perfunctory small talk, no welcoming greetings, just a heavy, expectant silence. Mr. Arthur Pendleton, the senior board director whose sharp email query had evidently set these events in motion, leaned forward, his gaze direct and appraising. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice devoid of preamble, "we would appreciate your perspective on the Meridian system's current architectural state and the anomalies in its recent performance reporting." I inclined my head slightly. Before I could speak, Julian interjected, his voice strained. "With all due respect, Mr. Pendleton, the system is complex. Perhaps Ms. Vance's older methodologies were not fully compatible with our new, agile approach." "But," I said, my voice soft yet clear in the suddenly silent room, cutting through Julian's attempt at deflection. I opened my lightweight tablet, connected it effortlessly to the projector, and a simple, unadorned data comparison chart illuminated the screen. No emotion colored my tone, no hint of triumph or vindication, just a calm recitation of facts. The Meridian predictive engine is currently producing inaccurate outputs due to specific, documented alterations in its core weighting configurations. The number of critical variables used in the forecast modeling was significantly reduced, from 7 to 4, without the necessary adaptive compensation in the algorithms. This, predictably, has caused a margin drift that compounds with each successive reporting cycle. I switched the display to another chart, a stark visual overlay comparing the original model's consistent accuracy with the current, altered version's erratic and misleading outputs. The differences were stark, undeniable. Additionally, I continued, my voice maintaining its even cadence, the early warning alert system, particularly within its crucial third and fourth tiers designed to flag complex, interdepartmental failure points, has been systematically disabled. This directly explains why critical shipment failures, such as the recent Clearbrook incident, went undetected by our internal teams until client complaints surfaced. Several heads around the table turned slowly towards Julian. He stared fixedly at the tabletop, his face flushed. He said nothing. "Here," I said, bringing up Meridian's immutable commit history log, a feature I had designed for absolute transparency. "This is the indelible record of every system change, timestamped, with the credentials of the user who authorized and executed each modification. As you can clearly see, the digital signatures for these critical alterations all trace back to Mr. Thorne's executive credentials." A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the soft hum of the ventilation system. Then came the moment that shifted the atmosphere entirely. Mr. Holloway, the representative from Clearbrook Partners, who had been listening with quiet intensity, slowly rose to his feet. "If I may," he said, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of a valued client's experience. "I will keep this brief. Clearbrook Partners has worked closely with Ms. Vance for over 5 years. Our operational integration and a significant portion of our own internal successes were built upon the reliability and sophistication of the Meridian platform as she architected and maintained it. When the quality of data and the responsiveness of the system began to degrade so noticeably, we knew, intuitively, that something fundamental had changed. Now we understand why." He turned from me to face the board members, his gaze steady and unwavering. "As of this morning, our executive committee has approved the immediate transfer of our entire systems operations and analytics budget. We will be engaging Ms. Vance directly, under a new independent consulting agreement, to oversee our data systems. She is the system, as far as we are concerned. And frankly, gentlemen, ladies, we trust her expertise and integrity far more than we currently trust whatever Silverstream Corporation has become." The room seemed to freeze. Mr. Finch blinked several times, as if he hadn't quite processed the words. Julian finally opened his mouth, a choked sound escaping, then closed it again, his shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. I didn't smile. I didn't offer a theatrical flourish. I simply gathered my tablet, stood up, and addressed the Chief Compliance Officer. "I will forward all relevant documentation and full system logs to your office within the hour. Everything else you need to understand is already indelibly recorded within the system itself." Then I turned and walked out of the executive boardroom, leaving behind a silence far more resonant, far more impactful than any speech I could have possibly delivered. Because sometimes, the most profound victory isn't in the impassioned words one speaks. It's in allowing the quiet, unassailable truth to finally speak for itself. By 8:20 the following morning, I had packed the last of my personal belongings from my small alcove at Silverstream into a simple, unassuming gray tote bag. There was no ceremony, no formal announcements of my departure, just the quiet, methodical movements of my hands folding a spare cardigan, unplugging my trusted ergonomic keyboard, and carefully wrapping the small, carved wooden bird my grandfather had made for me, a little talisman that had sat on my desk for years. My nameplate, Alara Vance, was already gone from its slot. No one had bothered to replace it with my new, diminished title. I found I didn't mind. The elevator ride down from the 11th floor felt slower than usual, or perhaps I was simply noticing the quiet descent more acutely. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I wasn't rushing towards the next deadline, the next system fix, the next quiet battle for recognition. The silence in the elevator didn't press in on me with the weight of unspoken things anymore. Instead, it felt like calm, clear water, holding me gently. As I crossed the expansive, sunlit lobby, a familiar voice, hesitant yet warm, broke through the ambient morning noise. "Alara? You're not even going to say goodbye." I turned. It was Sophie from finance, her expression a mixture of surprise and a kind of gentle understanding. She fell into step beside me as I continued towards the main glass doors, her eyes quickly scanning the bustling space, as if to ensure no one else was within earshot. "You don't need to explain anything," she said softly, her hand briefly touching my arm. "Just, for what it's worth, a lot of us saw what was happening. Maybe not everyone said anything out loud, but we saw it. And we're glad you're moving on to something better." I didn't offer a lengthy explanation, just a small, grateful smile and a quiet nod as I pushed open one of the heavy glass doors. Just as I was about to step out, another voice, younger, shyer, came from behind me. "Ms. Vance." It was Leo, a junior developer from the data integrity team, one of the few who still meticulously ran diagnostic reports the old, thorough way I had taught him. He didn't wait for a reaction, just quickly slipped a small, neatly folded piece of paper into my hand, gave a nervous but genuine smile, and then disappeared back into the swirling currents of the revolving doors. I stepped outside into the crisp port blossom morning. The spring air felt fresh, alive, carrying the scent of damp earth from the city's many parks and a faint, briny tang from the distant harbor, a freshness I hadn't truly noticed, truly inhaled, in months. I paused on the wide plaza, the sounds of the city a vibrant symphony around me. I pulled out my phone and tapped open the email I had starred the previous night, the one from Mr. Holloway at Clearbrook Partners. Subject: Offer confirmation, Principal Systems Architect and Strategic Data Consultant. The terms were generous, more than doubling my previous salary at Silverstream, offering full technical autonomy over their systems, and, most importantly, a dedicated team that clearly valued and respected the kind of deep, thoughtful architecture I believed in. No Mr. Finch. No Julian Thorne. Just the promise of clean code, honest, meaningful work, and a collaborative environment where a system and its architect would be allowed to breathe and grow authentically. As I scrolled through the details of the offer, my thumb inadvertently brushed against an older email, still lingering in my archived folder. Subject: Organizational Update, Realignment of Roles. A faint, reflective smile touched my lips. For a long, painful time, I had believed that brief, sterile meeting with Mr. Finch had been an ending, a demotion that sought to diminish me. Now, standing in the bright morning sun, with a new path unfolding before me, I saw it for what it truly was, not a demotion, but a redirection. A painful, challenging, but ultimately liberating realignment. I hadn't lost. I had simply been guided, through a difficult passage, to a higher, clearer ground. And this time, the journey forward would be entirely on my own terms, guided by my own quiet strength and the enduring value of truth.